Where was the woman who said she'd come? She said she would come. Or did he thought she'd have come by now? He sat and thought. He was in the living room. There was an insect on one of the shelves that held his audio equipment. The insect was dark and had a shiny case. He kept looking over at it. Once or twice he started to get up to go over closer to look at it, but he was afraid that if he came closer and saw it closer, he would kill it, and he was afraid to kill it. He did not use the phone to call the woman who'd promised to come, because if he tied up the line and if it happened to be the time when maybe she was trying to call him, he was afraid she would hear the busy signal and think him disinterested and get angry and maybe take what she'd promised him somewhere else. She had promised to get him 1/5 of a kilogram of marijuana, 200 grams of unusually good marijuana for $12.50 US. He had tried to stop smoking marijuana maybe 70 or 80 times before this woman knew him. She did not know he had tried to stop. He always lasted a week or 2 weeks or maybe 2 days, and then he'd think and decide to have some in his home one more last time. Once or twice he looked at the phone. The insect had disappeared back into the hole in the steel girder a shelf fit into. She'd promised to come at one certain time, and it was past that time. Finally, he gave in and called her number using just audio, and it rang several times, and he was afraid of how much time he was taking tying up the line, and he got her audio answering device, and he didn't leave a message because he didn't want her to know how much now he felt like he needed it. He had been very casual about the whole thing. He said he was trying to even remember when was the last time he'd bought any. It had been so long. He said he guessed he'd have her get a decent amount. He said he'd had some friends call him in the recent past and ask if he could get them some. He had this thing where he'd frequently say he was getting dope mostly for friends. Then, if the woman didn't have it when she said she'd have it for him, and he became anxious about it, he could tell the woman that it was his friends who were becoming anxious, and he was sorry to bother the woman about something so casual, but his friends were anxious and bothering him about it, and he just wanted to know what he could maybe tell them. He was caught in the middle is how he would represent it. He could say his friends had given him their money and were now anxious and exerting pressure, calling and bothering him. This tactic was not possible with this woman who said she'd come with it because he hadn't yet given her the $12.50. She would not let him. She was well off. This arrangement, very casual, made him anxious, so he'd been even more casual and said, sure, fine, whatever. Thinking back, he was sure he'd said whatever, which in retrospect worried him because it might have sounded as if he didn't care at all. Not at all. So little that it wouldn't matter if she forgot to get it or call. And once he'd made the decision to have marijuana in his home one more time, it mattered a lot. It mattered a lot. He'd been too casual with the woman. He should have made her take $12.50 from him up front, claiming politeness, claiming he didn't want to inconvenience her financially over something so trivial and casual. Money created a sense of obligation, and he should have wanted the woman to feel obliged to do what she'd said. Once what she'd said she'd do had set him off inside. Once he'd been set off inside, it mattered so much that he was somehow afraid to show how much it mattered. The insect on the shelf was back. It didn't seem to do anything. It just came out of the hole in the girder onto the edge of the steel shelf and sat there. After a while, it would disappear back into the hole in the girder, and he was pretty sure it didn't do anything in there either. He felt similar to the insect inside the girder his shelf was connected to, but was not sure just how he was similar. Once he'd decided to own marijuana one more last time, he was committed to several courses of action. He had to put an audio message on his answering device, saying that starting that afternoon, he was going to be unreachable for several days. He had to clean his bedroom because once he had dope, he would not leave his bedroom except to go to the refrigerator and the bathroom, and even then the trips would be very quick. He'd had to do some shopping. He'd had to lay in supplies. Now just one of the insect's antennae was protruding from the hole in the girder. It protruded, but it did not move. He'd had to log an order to rent film cartridges from the Interlace Entertainment outlet. He'd had to buy a new bong because each time he finished what simply had to be his last bulk quantity of marijuana, he decided that was it. He was through. He didn't even like it anymore. This was it. No more hiding, no more imposing on his colleagues and putting different messages on his answering device, and moving his car away from his condominium and closing his windows and curtains and blinds, and living in quick vectors between his bedroom's interlaced teleputers films and his refrigerator and his toilet, and he would take the bong he'd used and throw it away wrapped in several plastic shopping bags. He looked at the window and the clock. He looked at the windows, but not at the foliage and blacktop driveway beyond the windows. He had already vacuumed his Venetian blinds and curtains. Everything was ready to be shut down. Once the woman who said she'd come had come, he would shut the whole system down. It occurred to him that he would disappear into a hole in a girder inside him that supported something else inside him. He was unsure what the thing inside him was and was unprepared to commit himself to the course of action that would be required to explore the question. It was now almost 3 hours past the time when the woman had said she would come. A counselor, Randy, with an eye, with a mustache like a Mountie, had told him in the outpatient treatment program he'd gone through 2 years ago that he seemed insufficiently committed to the course of action that would be required to remove substances from his lifestyle. He considered getting up to check the color of the bong he'd be using, but decided that obsessive checking and convulsive movements could compromise the atmosphere of casual calm he needed to maintain while he waited. He was also hesitant to get up and check the color of his bong because he would have to pass right by the telephone console to get to the kitchen, and he didn't want to be tempted to call the woman who'd said she would come again because he felt creepy about bothering her about something something he'd represented as so casual, and was afraid that several audio hang-ups on his answering device would look even creepier. And also he felt anxious about maybe tying up the line at just the moment when she called, as she certainly would. He decided to get call waiting added to his audio phone service for a nominal extra charge, then remembered that since this was positively the last time he would or even could indulge what Randy with an I had called an addiction every bit as rapacious as pure alcoholism, there would be no real need for call waiting, since a situation like the present one could never arise again. This line of thinking almost caused him to become angry. To ensure the composure with which he sat waiting in light in his chair, he focused his senses on his surroundings. No part of the insect he'd seen was now visible. The clicks of his portable clock were really composed of 3 smaller clicks, signifying, he supposed, preparation, movement, and readjustment. He began to grow disgusted with himself for waiting so anxiously for the promised arrival of something that had stopped being fun anyway. He didn't even know why he liked it anymore. It made his mouth dry, and his eyes dry and red, and his face sag, and he hated it when his face sagged. It was as if all the integrity of all the muscles in his face was eroded by marijuana, and he got terribly self-conscious about the fact that his face was sagging, and had long ago forbidden himself to smoke dope around anyone else. He didn't even know what its straw was anymore. He couldn't even be around anyone else if he'd smoked marijuana that same day. It made him so self-conscious, and the dope often gave him a painful case of pleurisy if he smoked it for more than 2 straight days of heavy continuous smoking in front of the interlace viewer in his bedroom. It made his thoughts jut out crazily in jagged directions and made him stare raptly like an unbright child at entertainment cartridges. When he laid in film cartridges for a vacation with marijuana, he favored cartridges in which a lot of things blew up and crashed into each other, which he was sure an unpleasant fact specialist like Randy would point out had implications that were not good. He pulled his necktie down smooth while he gathered his intellect, will, self-knowledge, and conviction, and determined that when this latest woman came, as she surely would, this would simply be his very last marijuana debauch. He'd simply smoke so much so fast that it would be so unpleasant, and the memory of it so repulsive that once he'd consumed it and gotten it out of his home and his life as quickly as possible, he would never want to do it again. He would make it his business to create a really bad set of debauched associations with the stuff in his memory. The dope scared him. It made him afraid. It wasn't that he was afraid of the dope, it was that smoking it made him afraid of everything else. It had long since stopped being a release or relief or fun. He would smoke it all even if he didn't want it, even if it started to make him dizzy and ill. He would use discipline and persistence and will and make the whole experience so unpleasant, so debased and debauched and unpleasant, that his behavior would be henceforward modified. He'd never even want to do it again because the memory of the insane 4 days to come would be so firmly, terribly emblazoned in his memory. He had never been so anxious for the arrival of a woman he did not want to see. The insect was now entirely visible. He had to use the bathroom. He went into the bathroom to use the bathroom, making it a point to look neither at the insect visible on the shelf nor at the telephone console. He was committed to touching neither. Where was the woman who had said she'd come? He left the door to the bathroom open so that he would be sure to hear the telephone when it sounded or the buzzer to the front doors of his condominium complex when it sounded. In the bathroom, his throat suddenly closed, and he wept hard for 2 or 3 seconds before the weeping stopped abruptly and he could not get it to start again. It was now over 4 hours since the time the woman had casually committed to come. Was he in the bathroom or in his chair looking into the room from the bathroom near the window and near his telephone console and the insect and the window that had admitted a straight rectangular bar of light when he began to wait? The light through this window was coming at an angle more and more oblique. Its shadow had become a parallelogram. The light through the southwest window was straight and reddening. He had thought he needed to use the bathroom but was unable to. He had tried putting a whole stack of film cartridges into the dock of the disk drive and then turning on the teleputer in his bedroom. He lowered the volume all the way and pointed the remote device at the TP like some sort of weapon. He sat on the edge of his bed with his elbows on his knees and scanned the stack of cartridges. But he was unable to distract himself with the TP because he was unable to stay with any one entertainment cartridge for more than a few seconds. The moment he recognized what exactly was on one cartridge, he had a strong, anxious feeling that there was something more entertaining on another cartridge and that he was potentially missing it. He realized that he would have plenty of time to enjoy all the cartridges and realized intellectually that the feeling of deprived panic over missing something made no sense. He scanned cartridges for some time. The telephone console sounded during this interval of anxious scanning. He was up and moving back out toward it before the first ring was completed, flooded with either excitement or relief, the TP's remote device still in his hand. But it was only a friend and colleague calling, and when he heard the voice that was not the woman who had promised to bring what he'd committed the next several days to banishing from his life forever, he was almost sick with disappointment, with a great deal of mistaken adrenaline now shining and ringing in his system. And he got off the line with the colleague to clear the line and keep it available for the woman so fast that he was sure his colleague perceived him as either angry with him or just plain rude. He was further upset at the thought that his answering the telephone this late in the day did not jibe with the emergency message about being unreachable that would be on his answering device if the colleague called back after the woman had come and gone and he'd shut the whole system of his life down. And he was standing over the telephone console trying to decide whether the risk of the colleague or someone else from the agency calling back was sufficient to justify changing the audio message on the answering device to describe describe an emergency departure this evening instead of this afternoon, but he decided he felt that since the woman had definitely committed to coming, his leaving the message unchanged would be a gesture of fidelity to her commitment and might somehow, in some oblique way, strengthen that commitment. He returned to his chair near the window. The disk drive and TP viewer were still on in his bedroom. For a while, he killed time casually by trying to imagine what entertaining scenes on the unwatched viewer the changing colors and intensities might signify. The chair faced the room instead of the window. Reading while waiting for marijuana was out of the question. He considered masturbating, but did not. He didn't reject the idea so much as not react to it and watch as it floated away. He thought very broadly of desires and ideas being watched but not acted upon. He thought of impulses being starved of expression and drying out and floating dryly away, and felt on some level that this had something to do with him and his circumstances, and what if this grueling final debauch he'd committed himself to didn't somehow resolve the problem, would surely have to be called his problem, but he could not even begin to try to see how the image of desiccated impulses floating dryly related to either him or the insect, which had retreated back into its hole in the angled girder, because at this precise time, his telephone and his intercom to the front door's buzzer both sounded at the same time, both loud and tortured and so abrupt they sounded yanked through a very small hole into the great balloon of colored silence he sat in waiting. And he moved first toward the telephone console, then over toward his intercom module, then convulsively back toward the sounding phone, then tried somehow to move toward both at once, finally so that he stood splayed, arms wildly out as if something's been flung, splayed, entombed between the two sounds, without a thought in his head.